Hey everybody, it's Beej with Lambda School. We're going to continue on with Django today and look at under the hood how it does stuff with SQL. We're also going to take a quick peek at the Django ORM and see how that makes our life easier. So one thing we want to look at is how Django does things under the hood. We're going to use some SQL commands to get that done. And then we also want to take a look at how Django's ORM functionality makes things easier to access than using SQL. So the first thing we'll do here is launch the DB shell. And what this does is it gives us access to the database that Django has been building for us. This is a SQLite database by default. And so this will bring us into the SQLite shell. And from in here, we can do a number of things to figure out what the database looks like. One of the things we can do in the SQLite shell is ask what all the tables are. And we see here a bunch of tables, auth group, auth permission, auth user. So there's some information in here that we've probably set up, like user admin and user Fred would probably be in here, user permissions and so on. But here down at the end, we noticed a couple things: notes note and notes personal note. Those are kind of interesting because we have a note model and a personal note model. So these tables probably have that kind of information in them. We can ask for information on a certain table, and that'll tell us what we have in this table in terms of columns. So there's an ID field, title, content created at, and last modified. It has the types there. ID is a character field of 32 and varchar 20, it looks like, for title, text for content, and so on. If we go and have a look back at our code for where we've set up the models, we see exactly these fields: ID, title, content, created at, and last modified. And so these fields in our Python model have been mapped into fields in SQL here in this table. We can also have a look and see what's in this table. And we see there's an ID with which is a big UID. Title is example. Content is whatever the content is, and we have a couple timestamps there. So the information that we've stored in the table is definitely here. Let's have a look at personal note. Star from notes personal note. That's interesting. We've got one personal note here, but check this out. It doesn't actually have any content in it. If you remember, in our model, we inherit from note, and then we also have a foreign key to the user table. So it looks like what happens is that when we inherit from note, we end up with a note pointer ID to the primary key of the note. This points back to one of the records in note. And sure enough, right here it is, which is our personal note. So note's personal note turns out to be kind of a join table here. And we've got a foreign key reference to a user ID, which is probably our user ID in our auth user table. Let's see what's in here. Gigantic things that go for multiple lines, but here we have an ID and a username. So let's run that same select again and try to trim that down. All right. So sure enough, in our auth user table, we have a user ID. 1 is admin, 2 is Fred, and if we go back to our personal notes here, we see that we have a note pointer ID that goes back to our notes and the user ID that goes back to the user table. So we could do a complicated join here in order to get all the information out of all the tables we want, because we'd have to do a join to get it from these 3 different tables. For instance, if we wanted the user name that corresponded to a personal note. So we'd have to do a big selection from that. Note pointer ID is note ID, and so on. So we could do a big join to make this happen. But fortunately for us, Django takes care of all that stuff under the hood. And so instead of doing a big join with SQL and needing to worry about that, wouldn't it be nicer if we could just go ahead and use queries based on the personal note? We saw an ORM query earlier where we were looking at note from the Python shell. Let's do that one again. So let's bring up our Python shell. And so here we are in here. We should be able to do something like this. I'm going to import note and personal note from our notes models. And if you remember, there's a command called note.objects.all, which will return a list of all the note objects that we have in there. So we can look at this and say note sub 0 is a note object, and we can look at the title and so on, like that. So we can pull that information out of there. We can't look at the user because there is no such thing on a note. But let's look at personal note. Grab all these objects out of here. And then personal notes sub 0 dot title we have, and personal notes sub 0 dot user we also have. So we didn't have to do a complicated join or anything. We know that under the hood, the personal notes table is actually just a join table between the user table and the note table. But when we used Django's ORM here, we were able to select the personal notes using the exact same line that we used to select all the notes. And then we were able to automagically get the user out, because that was joined for us when we made the query. Now there are other things we can do with this ORM. It's actually incredibly powerful, so I recommend Googling Django queries to see what kind of stuff we do. But one of the things that we can do with this is get a specific note based on, say, its title or its key. So let's go ahead and look for a key on the notes. So let's say notes sub 2. We got that note object. It's got an ID, and that ID is its primary key. So let's go ahead and grab this thing and try to get that exact note. So note.object.get, and then we're going to specify the primary key is that thing. And pk is just an alias. We could have put ID there, but when you say pk, it uses whichever field you've specified as the primary key field. Note.objects.get. So with the primary key field specified there, we should be able to see that we have this note, and we can get the title out of that and the content. So get allows you to get something by a specific field, and we should be able to also run a get objects.get, and we'll specify the title is equal to note 3. This should also get us the same note, and we see that the UID is the same, and sure enough. So get allows us to specify a specific field, sort of like you do with a select and a where. You can also do things more generally. So if, let's say, there, with SQL we have the like command to match a partial string. So we could do note.objects.filter, and then we can say something like title __ starts with, and then give it something for the title to start with. And then what do we have here? We've got a query set. It looks like it only has one result in it, because only one of them started with N. But we can look and see in the query set and look at the title, make sure it starts with a capital N. It does. If we attempt a filter that starts with nothing, we're still going to get a query set back, but it's going to be empty because nothing matched that particular query. This only scratches the surface of what the Django ORM can do in terms of queries, but hopefully gives you an idea of that power. It's a good thing to Google and look up more information on. So, for a challenge, go look up more of these ORM queries. Use the filter function to select subsets of rows. We already used starts with, but there are a bunch of other suffixes you can put on there to change how the filtering works. And then there's also an order by. If you want to order the results within the query set, you can use that. Again, this is only scratching the surface. Go play around with the ORM and see what it can do. Have some fun. And as always, thanks for watching.